I never thought going on a lake house vacation with my college friends would end my 2-year relationship, but apparently maintaining friendships with guys is some kind of offense when you have an insecure boyfriend who can't handle the fact that I existed before he came into my life. Look, I'm not even going to sugarcoat this because honestly, everyone's acting like I'm some kind of villain when all I did was go on a vacation with my friends. I'm Delilah. I'm 24, and my boyfriend Jack just dumped me because apparently maintaining friendships with guys is some kind of problem now. But whatever. Let me tell you what really happened. Because the way people are talking about it, you'd think I burned down an orphanage or something. So Jack and I had been together for like 2 years, and things were pretty decent, I guess. He's 26, works some office job, pays his bills on time, all that responsible adult stuff. But here's the thing that always bothered me about him. He was so insecure about my friendships. Like, I've been friends with Matthew, Mason, Devontae, and Jordan since college, and these guys are literally like my brothers. I mean, Matthew and I had a thing freshman year, but that was literally 4 years ago, and it meant nothing. We were at a party, it was stupid, and we both agreed it was a mistake, but apparently Jack could never get over that. The whole vacation thing started when the guys were planning this lake house trip for a long weekend. They do it every summer, it's like their tradition, and this year Matthew asked if I wanted to come along. I was excited because honestly, I hadn't hung out with them in months because Jack always got weird about it. Every time I'd mention grabbing drinks with them or going to Mason's birthday party, Jack would get this look on his face like I just told him I was planning to cheat on him. It was exhausting. When I told Jack about the lake house trip, his reaction was exactly what I expected. He got all quiet and started asking these questions like, will there be other girls there? And where are you sleeping? Like, dude, these are my friends. I've known them longer than I've known you. The fact that he immediately went to a place of suspicion instead of being happy that I was invited just proved to me how insecure he really was. I tried to explain to him that it wasn't a big deal. I told him they're like my brothers, that nothing would happen, that he was being ridiculous, but he just kept saying he was uncomfortable with it. Uncomfortable with what exactly? Me having friends, me existing in the same space as people with male anatomy. It was honestly insulting. Like, what did he think was going to happen that I'd suddenly forget I had a boyfriend and turn into some kind of party girl? The more he expressed his discomfort, the more frustrated I got. I started thinking about my ex Ryan, who never had issues with my friendships. Ryan trusted me. Ryan understood that just because someone has male friends doesn't mean they're going to cheat. But Jack was acting like my father, trying to control where I could go and who I could see. And I've been down that road before with my actual father, and I swore I'd never let another man control me like that. I told Jack he was being dramatic and that I was disappointed he didn't trust me. I mean, what's the point of being in a relationship with someone who thinks so little of you that they assume you can't be around other men without doing something inappropriate? It hurt honestly. Here I was being completely transparent about my plans, and instead of supporting me, he was trying to make me feel guilty for maintaining friendships that existed long before he came into the picture. The week before the trip, Jack got even weirder. He'd make these little comments like, have fun with your friends, in this tone that made it clear he wasn't actually wishing me well. He'd ask what I was packing, like he was trying to catch me bringing something inappropriate. When Matthew texted me about what time to pick me up, Jack saw the notification and asked who was texting me. When I said it was Matthew, he got that look again, that suspicious, untrusting look that made me feel like a criminal in my own relationship. I started keeping my phone face down because I was tired of Jack analyzing every interaction I had with my friends. Matthew and I were just coordinating logistics, who was bringing what food, what time we were leaving, normal friend stuff. But Jack was treating every text like it was evidence of some grand conspiracy. It was ridiculous and honestly kind of pathetic. The night before I left, we had what I thought would be our final conversation about it. I tried one more time to reassure him that nothing was going to happen, that I loved him, that he had nothing to worry about, but instead of being grateful for my reassurance, he just kept saying he wished I wouldn't go. Not that he was forbidding me because he knew he couldn't, but that he wished I wouldn't. Like that was supposed to make me change my mind, like I was supposed to cancel plans with friends I barely got to see anymore, just because my boyfriend had trust issues. I told him that if he couldn't handle me having male friends, maybe we weren't compatible. I wasn't going to give up friendships that were important to me just to manage his insecurities. These guys had been there for me through everything my parents, divorce failing, organic chemistry, that whole mess with my roommate junior year. They were my support system long before Jack came along, and they'd probably still be my friends long after he was gone, which looking back now was pretty prophetic, I guess. When I left for the trip that Friday morning, Jack barely said goodbye. He was getting ready for work and just gave me this cold, have a good time, without even looking at me. I was hurt, but also relieved to be getting away from all the negative energy he'd been putting out. Matthew picked me up in his truck, and as soon as I got in and saw his smile, I felt this weight lift off my shoulders. This was going to be exactly what I needed: time with people who actually wanted to spend time with me, who weren't constantly questioning my motives or making me feel bad for existing. The 2 hour drive to the lake house was exactly what I'd been missing. Matthew and I caught up on everything: his new job, my work drama, mutual friends from college. We laughed about old times, sang along to music, and I remembered why I'd been friends with these guys for so long. They got my sense of humor. They didn't make me feel like I had to watch every word or analyze every interaction for hidden meanings. With them, I could just be myself without constantly worrying about whether I was doing something wrong. When we got to the lake house and I saw Mason, Devontae, and Jordan, it was like being transported back to college. These were my people. We had inside jokes, shared memories, that easy comfort that comes from years of friendship. And yeah, Jack wasn't there to witness it, but so what? Just because I could relax and have fun with my friends didn't mean I was doing anything wrong. I was being exactly who I'd always been: the person Jack fell in love with in the first place, supposedly. That first night, we grilled burgers, played cards, and stayed up way too late talking about everything and nothing. It was exactly what I needed after weeks of walking on eggshells around Jack's mood. When Matthew suggested we all crash in the living room like old times instead of figuring out the bedroom situation, I didn't think twice about it. We'd done it plenty of times in college, just friends hanging out, nothing weird about it. The fact that Jack would probably have a problem with it just proved how different our perspectives were on what constituted appropriate friendship. I felt more like myself that weekend than I had in months, and if that made me a terrible girlfriend, then maybe Jack and I really weren't meant to be together. Maybe someone who truly loved me would want me to be happy and comfortable with my friends, not constantly stressed about whether my natural personality was somehow inappropriate or threatening to our relationship. The vacation was exactly what I needed to remember who I was outside of Jack's constant worry and suspicion. I was fun, I was social, I was the kind of person people wanted to be around, and I wasn't going to apologize for that anymore, no matter what was waiting for me when I got home. When Mason suggested we extend the trip by a day because the weather was perfect and nobody wanted to leave, I barely hesitated before saying yes. I texted Jack that we were staying an extra night, and when he didn't respond, I figured he was just busy with work. I wasn't going to let his mood ruin what had been such a perfect weekend. These were my friends, this was my vacation, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it without feeling guilty about having a good time. Looking back now, I can see that Jack was probably already planning his little dramatic exit while I was gone. He probably spent the whole weekend working himself up into a frenzy, imagining all kinds of scenarios that existed only in his head, because that's what insecure people do. They create problems where none exist, and then they blame everyone else when their relationships fall apart because of their own issues. But at the time, sitting by the lake with my friends watching the sunset and feeling genuinely happy for the first time in weeks, I had no idea that Jack was back home, basically planning our breakup. I thought I was just enjoying time with people who cared about me. I thought I was being a normal 24-year-old woman who was allowed to have friendships and a life outside of her relationship. Apparently, I was wrong about what was acceptable in Jack's world, but that says more about him than it does about me. The last night of the trip, Matthew and I ended up talking alone on the dock while the other guys were inside playing video games. It was nothing inappropriate, just two old friends catching up under the stars, but I found myself telling him things about my relationship with Jack that I hadn't really articulated before. How controlled I felt sometimes, how exhausting it was to constantly have to justify my friendships, how different I felt around Jack compared to how I felt around them. Matthew listened without judgment and reminded me of who I used to be before I started second guessing myself all the time. He told me I seemed stressed lately and that my happiness mattered. It was exactly what I needed to hear from someone who'd known me for years and could see the changes in me that I'd been trying to ignore. When he hugged me goodnight, it felt like the first genuine physical comfort I'd had in weeks. Just a friend caring about my well being, nothing more complicated than that. But I already knew that Jack would find a way to make even that innocent moment into something sinister if he knew about it. That's what happens when you're in a relationship with someone who doesn't trust you. Even the most normal interactions start to feel loaded with potential for conflict. You start hiding perfectly innocent things just to avoid the inevitable interrogation and accusations. It's exhausting and it's no way to live. When Matthew dropped me off at home Sunday night, I felt like I was returning from another world. The apartment felt small and tense compared to the open, easy atmosphere I'd just left behind. Jack was there waiting for me, but instead of being happy to see me, he had this weird energy that immediately put me on the defensive. Before I could even set my bag down, I could tell he'd spent the whole weekend building up resentment instead of missing me like a normal boyfriend would. I tried to greet him with enthusiasm, telling him about the beautiful lake and the perfect weather, but he just stared at me with this look I'd never seen before, cold and distant like he was looking at a stranger. And that's when I knew that everything I'd feared about going on this trip was about to come true, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because Jack had spent the weekend convincing himself that I had. Before I tell you about the conversation that ended everything, I need to ask you guys for a huge favor. Please hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. It really helps me keep sharing these stories. And definitely smash that like button if you think I'm being reasonable here. Also, drop a comment and let me know what city you're watching from. I love seeing how many different places you all are tuning in from. It honestly makes me feel less alone in all this craziness. Okay, now back to what happened when I got home from the best weekend I'd had in months. The break was supposed to be a chance for me to recharge and come back to our relationship refreshed and happy. Instead, it had apparently been the final straw for Jack, who couldn't handle his girlfriend having close friendships with men. And honestly, if that's the kind of man he was, then maybe losing him wasn't going to be the tragedy I thought it would be. Maybe it was just the wake up call I needed to stop settling for someone who saw my friendships as threats instead of celebrating the fact that I was someone people wanted to be around. But I still wasn't prepared for what came next because I genuinely believed that if I just explained everything clearly enough, Jack would realize he'd been overreacting and we could move past this. I had no idea that he'd already made up his mind while I was gone, and that nothing I said was going to change the decision he'd already made about our future. Jack didn't even wait for me to unpack before he started the conversation that would end everything. He sat me down with this serious expression and told me he'd been doing a lot of thinking while I was away. The way he said it so formal and final made my stomach drop because I could tell this wasn't going to be a normal relationship discussion. This was going to be something bigger and more permanent than I was ready for. He started talking about compatibility and values and boundaries, using all these relationship therapy words, like he'd been researching how to break up with someone properly. He wasn't yelling or accusing me of cheating, which somehow made it worse because I couldn't paint him as the crazy, jealous boyfriend. Instead, he was being calm and rational and devastating, explaining that he couldn't be with someone whose idea of appropriate boundaries was so different from his own. I tried everything. I cried, I argued, I promised to be more considerate of his feelings in the future. I offered to limit my contact with the guys or to always include him in group plans, but nothing worked because he'd already decided that we were fundamentally incompatible, and he wasn't interested in negotiating or compromising. He just kept saying that he wanted different things from a relationship and that neither of us should have to change who we were to make it work. When he told me he'd already found a new place and would be moving out within the week, I realized that this wasn't a heat of the moment decision. This was something he'd been planning while I was innocently enjoying time with my friends, thinking everything was fine between us. He'd use my absence to pack up our relationship and prepare his exit strategy. And now he was just informing me of decisions he'd already made without me. The worst part was how reasonable he sounded. He wasn't calling me names or making dramatic accusations. He was just calmly explaining that our relationship had run its course and that continuing would be unfair to both of us. But his reasonableness made me feel crazy, like I was the one being dramatic for being upset that my 2 year relationship was ending because I went on a weekend trip with friends. I spent the next few days in shock, expecting him to change his mind or at least want to talk more about it, but Jack was done talking. He moved out efficiently and quietly, taking only his stuff and leaving everything we'd bought together. He was polite but distant, treating me like an acquaintance instead of someone he'd shared a bed with for 2 years. It was like he'd already emotionally moved on while I was still trying to process what was happening. When I called my best friend Indy to tell her what happened, I expected sympathy and validation. Instead, she asked me a bunch of questions about the trip that made me feel like even she thought I'd done something wrong. She wanted to know details about sleeping arrangements and whether I'd been texting Jack while I was away. When I got defensive and told her she was supposed to be on my side, she said she was on the side of truth, whatever that meant. That's when I realized that Jack had probably been talking to people while I was gone, planting seeds about our relationship problems, and painting himself as the long suffering boyfriend who'd finally reached his limit. Because suddenly everyone had opinions about my friendship with the guy's opinions they'd kept to themselves for years, but were now eager to share. It was like Jack's version of events was spreading through our social circle, turning people against me before I even had a chance to defend myself. Within a month of our breakup, I started hearing through mutual friends that Jack was doing great. He joined a gym, picked up rock climbing, was going out more with his coworkers. People kept telling me how good he looked, how much happier he seemed, how it was obvious the relationship had been weighing him down. Meanwhile, I was struggling to understand how someone could just move on so quickly from 2 years together, like our relationship had meant nothing to him. The guys were supportive at first, but even that started to feel weird after a while. Matthew was suddenly less available for long phone conversations, and Mason stopped inviting me to group hangouts. When I asked what was going on, they said they didn't want to get involved in drama, which hurt because I hadn't created any drama. I just lost my boyfriend and was looking for support from my friends, but apparently that was too complicated for them to handle. The final blow came when I found out through Instagram that Jack was dating someone new, some girl from his rock climbing group who looked exactly like the kind of person who would never have male friends or go on vacation without her boyfriend. She seemed sweet and uncomplicated, and everything I apparently wasn't. Seeing them together, looking happy and natural, made me realize that Jack had moved on completely while I was still trying to figure out what went wrong. Looking back now, I think Jack was just looking for an excuse to end things, and my vacation gave him the perfect out. He got to be the victim and the good guy who tried to make it work, but couldn't handle his girlfriend's inappropriate behavior. Meanwhile, I'm the one who looks like the inconsiderate girlfriend who chose her friends over her relationship. But honestly, if maintaining important friendships makes me a bad girlfriend, then maybe I'm better off without someone who can't handle the full version of who I am. Everyone keeps acting like I should have known better, like I should have anticipated that going away with my friends would end my relationship. But why should I have to give up important relationships to keep a boyfriend happy? Why should his insecurity dictate which friendships I'm allowed to maintain? I refuse to believe that being a good girlfriend means isolating myself from people who care about me just to manage someone else's trust issues. At the end of the day, Jack showed me who he really was, someone who would rather end a 2 year relationship than work through his own insecurities. Someone who could replace me within weeks like I'd never mattered at all. Someone who turned our mutual friends against me by sharing his version of events while I was still processing the breakup. And honestly, maybe losing someone like that isn't the tragedy I thought it was. Maybe it's just the universe's way of making room for someone who can actually handle being with an independent woman who has her own friendships and her own life. I'm not going to apologize for being someone people want to be around. I'm not going to pretend that my friendships with guys are inappropriate just because Jack couldn't handle them. And I'm definitely not going to change who I am for the next person I date because anyone worth being with will love all of me, including the parts that come with a rich social life and meaningful friendships that existed long before they showed up. Jack can have his rock climbing girlfriend who probably asks permission before making plans with friends. They're probably perfect for each other, two people who think love means limiting each other's world instead of expanding it. But that's not the kind of relationship I want, and I'm glad I found out now instead of wasting more years trying to make myself smaller to fit into his narrow idea of what a girlfriend should be.